Well, hey, it's Wes, and today we are talking about an incredibly interesting lens. That is the new Laowa 12-24 f5.6 zoom shift lens. That's a lot of stuff. Let's get into it, starting with, as always, the build quality. You might remember recently I reviewed the Laowa 55 macro tilt shift lens, not a zoom lens. This thing is massive. Solid chunk of metal. Well, I am happy to report this is not as massive. This is a shockingly compact lens with a lot going on. We have a metal cap with some plastic screwing elements on the inside. We have a nice back cap. Now, unfortunately, the Laowa back caps are a little hard to get on, and they often don't fit on other branded lenses. That's really frustrating. Metal knob, metal detent, nice little metal gauge right here. All metal. Can't be weather sealed, unfortunately. It would be very hard to make a weather sealed shift. It is not internally zooming. You can see the element in the front there is moving as we zoom. Yep. But this is an all metal design, very solid. The fit and finish is just incredible, how everything just lines up so nicely. Like, there is so much going on here. With the 55, we had a lot of knobs and buttons and like stuff sticking out of it that I wasn't a huge fan of. Now there's more going on there, but this just feels like a slightly more refined design. It's not as crazy. Our shift element is a ring here, followed by a clicked aperture. Not a lot of clicks because we just have 5/6 to 22. Our zoom ring, very tiny, and our focus ring. They all feel fantastic. For build quality, I'm gonna have to give this a 9 out of 10. It just feels perfect in the hand, but it's not weather sealed. Speaking of in the hand, handling and usability. While this one, the rings are very close together, so you still have to take your time, it is not a lens that gets in its own way at the same time. You kind of have to keep glancing at the lens to get it right, and it is still a very tripod-y lens, but you would almost never use a lens like this off a tripod, because this is very much a architecture and real estate sort of deal here. One big boon for usability is that you can take those ultra-wide shots and move where you are. If you've never used a shift lens, it is really shocking how far it can shift your perspective. It's a big shift. You want to get out of a mirror. If you want to lift your camera up to get better aligned angles and a better viewpoint, you can do that with this lens. It's not just run and gun. It's not simple. You really get your fingers in there, and sometimes you'll accidentally hit the wrong dial. So I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10 for handling usability. Mostly because, look at how tiny this thing is. It's a 12mm lens. And it's a zoom lens in this tiny form factor, so that's a huge win. Most 12mm or zoom lenses are much larger, mostly because they go to larger apertures, but still incredibly compact. Image quality. Here's where we have a bit of a struggle. Wide open at 5/6, it's a tiny bit soft. Stop it down to about f8. It is surprisingly sharp for such a complex lens. And with a lens like this, you're almost never going to be using it at 5.6 anyway. Now, we do have a fair amount of vignetting going on when we are at the widest end, and also the vignetting is a bit odd in that it has a bit of a green and cool shift to it. Now, some people might say that is difficult to deal with instead of just using the vignette slider, but when I was editing my photos, I created one mask that compensated for that color shift and applied it to all my 12mm photos, and boom, it was gone. So it wasn't a huge deal, but it is there. Chromatic aberration, I don't know how you could find it. I didn't see any. Flare control is pretty good. However, the image washes out a little bit when you have a lot of like bright side incident light coming into it. And when you're at the widest end, the shift can sometimes cut into the edges of the lens. This thing is just really going for broke and getting all that it can out of itself, and I appreciate that. So if you shift as far as you can at the widest end, you will get some cut in. So for image quality, I'm giving this a 7.75 out of 10. Good, but with compromises. Image character. 12mm, very interesting character to play with. The flares are nice, not amazing. The sun stars, interesting, again, not amazing. The bokeh, I mean, it exists if you really get up there at the 24mm mark. Not that amazing, but just generally speaking, the look that you can achieve with a lens like this is incomparable. Like, it's hard to get this look with anything else. Being able to go from 12mm to 24mm, and I love the look of an ultra-wide lens, and for the most part this lens is almost entirely rectilinear. When you zoom out all the way to 12mm, there is a little bit of distortion going on here, but there aren't very many lenses that you can go to 12mm with that there is no distortion whatsoever. But this is not a 0D 12mm, you just need to correct it a little bit, as you can see here. So for image character, I'm going to give this an 8 out of 10. Still loved it, loved the looks. Focus performance. On my focus performance scale, if you are a manual focus lens and you do not have electronic contacts on the back like some Zeiss lenses do, the highest you can get is 4 out of 10. That's if focus peaking works at all apertures, and it does here. And also, since you are shooting so wide and your aperture is not enormous, it is very hard to miss focus on this lens. You punch in, you're going to get it. You're not going to be running around with a lens like this anyway, so it is going to be a 4 out of 10 for focus performance. It's as good as you can expect from a manual focus lens like this. Value. Here's where I have to apologize. I botched the value on the 55 when I reviewed it. I compared it to some lenses that were just tilt or just shift. It is a tilt and shift and macro lens. It is a somewhat incomparable lens. I retroactively change my scores all the time if I decide I got something wrong or if the market shifts. So the 55 I have adjusted to 9.5 because the closest thing to it is the Canon 52.8 tilt shift lens, and that's an old lens. It's $2,200, about twice the price. But there are a lot of things that you can get and do a lot of the job of that lens, but nothing that does all of it for a competitive price. Moving back to our 12 to 24, there is pretty much nothing that you can get that does what this does. There are no zoom shift lenses at the ultra-wide range. It just doesn't exist. This is the only lens. The closest I can find is the Canon 17 tilt shift. That's $2,150. This lens is $700. It has a couple flaws, but oh boy, is that a bargain. If you are an architecture photographer, being able to shift and change your perspective, if you are that photographer, you do architecture, you know who you are. You need ultra wide and you want to be able to manipulate your field of view. This is the lens for you, and there's nothing that compares to it. So that's fantastic. I have to give it a 10 out of 10. If something comes out to compete with it, that score will go back down, but as for right now, it's the only thing. It's the only player in the game. That gives us a total score of 77.9%. What do you think about this crazy, interesting, super niche, but fantastic lens? If you want to pick one up, there's going to be a link down in the description to help support this channel and feed my fat cats. Until next time, let's go take some very interesting wide photos.